All right, so let's talk about application state. So up to this point, we have been maintaining state only on the client, right? Either using the out-of-the-box state management from React or the more powerful use of Redux. But we've seen some limitations, right, on what is that we can maintain, right? The state only survives for the current session of the page that you just currently logged in, that you currently loaded. Instead, we would like to be able to survive refreshes, right? And the only way to do that is on the server side, on the middle tier. So to do this, the mechanism is based on a technology that has been around for quite a while, right, called cookies, right, where we have the server ask the browser to keep track of some token that it can provide every time it comes and visits, so that the server can distinguish one request from the other, right? By design, HTTP is stateless. It's a stateless protocol, right? There's no way for a server. Well, there's no way. The server can't tell that the request is coming from one person, from one browser, from a request coming from somebody else, right? Well, obviously, you could look at the IP address, but HTTP itself is not designed for that. That's not its point, right? It serves everybody equally, right? And by design, it doesn't remember that it's still you asking for the weather, and you've been providing providing the zip code because you want your weather, as opposed to somebody else asking for their weather. Ideally, I would like to be able to remember that it's still you, and that you have to tell me your zip code only once, and not having to provide it repeatedly, right? So ideally, we have some context, right? We have some conversation, a dialogue, where you tell me something once, and now you don't need to repeat yourself over and over. But with HTTP all by itself, you can't. So to solve this issue early on, they invented the use of cookies, right? They said, all right, let's have the browsers and servers agree, right, that the server, whenever a client goes out to a server, whenever a browser, it goes out to a server, say they want to go to acme.com, the browser is going to maintain a cookie store locally on the browser, on the file system, only available to the browser. And it's going to check to see, okay, you're visiting acme.com. Let me see if I have a cookie for acme.com, right? So since this is the very first time, the browser says, oh, no, there's no cookie for acme.com. I send a request to the server acme.com, and the server says, oh, well, you did not provide a cookie, so this must be the very first time that you are visiting me. I will create a cookie for you, right? I will create a session for you randomly. If it's Java, typically the name of that cookie is called JSessionID. If it's some other framework or infrastructure, the cookie names is specific to the framework of use. For Java, typically, or for Tomcat, it'll be JSessionID, right? Equal to some token, right, randomly generated by the server. This is sent over in the header as a response to the browser. The browser, if the browser has turned on that it supports cookie, right, it will store the cookie for Acme, right, so that next time when it visits acme.com, it'll find the cookie in the store and it'll provide it back to the server. Yes, right? And so it stores saying that for acme.com, this is the cookie that I have, right? And it keeps it per domain. It maintains a database that per domain I have all these cookies, so that it knows when to send it to what server. Next time, the second time around, the browser checks for acme.com and sees that it does have a cookie, a JSession QWE123. It visits the server for the second time. It sends the cookie. The server says, now you do have a cookie. Thank you, right? Because what the server had done for you, so that it can maintain a conversation with you, a dialogue, it had instantiated an object, an HTTP session object, which is mapped, right, to this cookie ID, right? So for everybody who's visiting the server, there could be 1,000 conversations that visit the server. The server will instantiate an HTTP session for the 1,000 conversations, all queued off of the the particular cookie ID for that it would generate for you. You can imagine that this can create some memory-intensive load on the server. So usually we say that the stateful sessions, right, are not as scalable as stateless sessions, as stateless applications. So stateful applications are not as scalable as stateless applications, right? Because you can ask for, you would need a larger footprint to be able to support all this memory of having to remember 1,000 conversations. Right? Remember that this is your zip code, and that's your zip code, and that's your zip code. Somewhere I need to store it in memory, queued off of whoever cookie it is. Make sense? Now, typically these sessions are typically configured to time out after some time of inactivity. Right? So whenever you get a cookie, the session is renewed, right, for another, say, 30 minutes. Right? If I don't get a cookie request from you in the last 30 minutes, I'm just going to throw away that session because it's just occupying memory space for me, and I need to maintain some other 1,000 conversation from somebody else, right? So here notice that we did pass a JSession ID. I retrieved the HttpSession ID instance that I had created earlier, right? And if you have any code, I'll pass it along to the application. Right? In our case, it will be the REST controller. Right? In our case, it will be the REST controller. I'm going to pass it to the REST controller, and the REST controller can use that session to do whatever. Maybe I'll store that zip code that you've been telling me about, right? So that next time you come back, I'll remember what your zip code is, right? So I can give you weather specific to that zip code, and you don't have to keep telling me. So, for instance, I might set an attribute. I can set an attribute on the session. I can treat the session as if it were a map. I can put anything I want in there. I can put strings, I can put objects, I can put whatever I want to remember next time around. It'll be there next time I come back if it's within the 30 minutes, or if it hasn't timed out. So I can set an attribute equal to whatever value I want, and then I send it back to the client, to the browser, saying, hey, it's still the same cookie. It's still the same cookie. And then the browser just stores it back in there. So I can set data into the session, or next time around, I can get the attribute that I put in there. Right? One of the attributes might be currently logged in user. Right? I could remember, oh, that's you. Right? You're logged in. And if you're not there, if you don't have a cookie, if I don't have a session, you must not be logged in. I don't know who you are. Right? And then I can challenge you to log in again. Right? So your session would be 30 minutes, and then it would time out. So the same thing, cookie, retrieve the session, pass it to the application. Now I can get the attribute and then do whatever I want with that attribute. Find out that you are indeed logged in. Make sense? All right. So here's a couple examples, really, really trivial examples. It's just a normal REST controller, right? Nothing weird about that. Now the new thing here is that, most of this is something that we already know. Path variables, we know what those do, right? And the endpoint is called set session attribute. This is just illustrating the fact that I can store anything in a session, right? And so notice the mapping. So API, session, set, and then some attribute equal to some value, right? Just to show you that I can store something in the session. And notice that the way the session is passed on to me is that I just added as an attribute, as a parameter to my function. See that, right? So this is the handling of the cookie, the instantiation of the session, the mapping of the cookie to the session. All that is transparent to me. Right? The fact that underneath we're using cookies, that is all completely transparent. That happens behind the scenes. I just have to ask for the session. Right, that session would be mapped to this cookie ID. Make sense? That's one of the things that you can look at the session object. One of the attributes is the ID. Right, and that ID, right, if you step through it and you put a breakpoint, you'll see that over time it's the same ID because it's mapped to the same cookie. If you keep looking, if for some reason you start seeing that it's a different ID, something's wrong. Either the browser's not supporting cookies, or somewhere the cookie's being lost somewhere, and you're not getting the same session, right? And so you're storing something always to a brand new session. It says, why is this not working? Because you're not getting the same session. So here, to write to the session, you just say session.setAttribute, and then a name value pair, a tuple, right? So one attribute value, so like a name, like a variable and a value, and then we're just going to return the value, or I can retrieve it. To retrieve it, same thing. I'm here in the get, I'm passing the attribute name that I want to retrieve that I presumably had set in the previous time, and then I can say session.getAttribute, right, and retrieve the attribute. Now notice that I'm casting. See the casting there, right? And that's why I can really put anything in the session. I could put a user, I could put a course, I could put a module, I could put anything in there, right? So it's really a map of objects, right? So whenever it comes back, whenever I retrieve an attribute, it comes back as a generic object, right? So I need to cast it back to the original instance or the original type when I stored it in there. So I have to remember, if I stored a user object, right, to then cast it back into a user object when I retrieve it. Make sense? And finally, the session can time out and invalidate itself, meaning say, you know, whatever cookie you have, it no longer maps to any valid session, right? Or I can programmatically do that. I can say invalidate immediately the session, right? Maybe somebody logs out, clicks on the logout button, and it goes out to the server and says invalidate my session. Right? I'm no longer logged in. Just throw away my session. And you can release that data into memory. So here's an example on using this idea to implement logging. So let's play around with this logging and this registration. Okay, let's do that.